Today I want to show you a quick performance win you can get by deferring some data loading until after a page's initial render. Now, this is an app that I'm working on, and we noticed some performance issues when we hooked it up to a production database. So a lot of these pages were pretty quick. I could move around the app pretty easily. But when I came to load a user, this page was slow. Now this was weird because this page doesn't have a ton of data. So if we click on these users, they all kind of take a while to load. And we cache them, so if you visit them a second time or use the back button, they're fast, but that first page load takes a while. Now some users have some more data. So if we come down here to LeBron James and we click on him, then we see, well, he has subscriptions to a lot of these products. And this app is kind of about managing companies and employees and subscriptions to products. So in this case, LeBron James has this data here. But for a lot of these records, these users don't have any subscriptions yet. So the question is, there's not much data on this page, so why is it taking a long time? Well, to answer this question, the first thing that I did was come here, open the console, and I've gone ahead and simulated this in Mirage. And let's go ahead and reload the page. And we can see the requests that are going out to render this page. Now we can see that this is the one that's loading this user, and it's loading a bunch of included data. And we can see it's including things like coverage group and department, and those are fields that are listed in this details section. But it's also loading the user's employer, that employer's subscriptions, and the associated product and supplier for each subscription, as well as that user's licenses and the subscription product and supplier that those belong to. And what I realized is if you come down here and click Add Product, well, then you get a list of every product that the company subscribes to. And you can choose it and add it for the user. And now the user subscribes to this product. And that's basically how this application works. But the reason this page is taking so long to load, even if the user has no subscriptions of their own, is because of this list of data here. So a common way to speed up the perceived performance of an Ember app is to be a little more intelligent about how we load data. And in this case, because these products aren't even needed until the user clicks this button, there's no reason we should block the initial render of this page just to load those products and subscriptions. So what we're going to do is fix that. Let's come over here to our code, and this is the route for this user detail page that we're looking at. And the route's pretty simple. It just has a model hook. And here we see all the includes, and then we're just returning a fetch here. And this is the slow query that is blocking our page. And in particular, it's this part of the include that's fetching the employer's complete collection of subscriptions for that dropdown. So first, let's just come back here, refresh the page, and we see that spinner. And now if I were to just drop all of these subscriptions and just load the employer, well, then we see that the user loaded much faster. And if I come back here to the user list and load these new users, well, now we can see that the app is much faster. So, okay, we've removed the problematic part of this blocking query from our page. And if we scroll down, we see that there's a new message in this product section. It says Acme Inc. has no active subscriptions. But we know that's wrong. It's just that we haven't loaded those subscriptions yet because we commented them out here. Okay, so the first trick we can use in this situation is to just move our query that was blocking in the model hook and move it to a non-blocking request in the after model hook. So let's do that now. We'll come down here, define after model. We'll have the user that was returned from the model hook. And basically what we want to do is rerun this query, get store, load record user, and we'll get user.getID. And then include will be simple. We'll just grab this string right up here and be sure to include all these subscriptions. Now, if we return this query from after model, Ember will still block that initial render of our page. But if we don't return this query and we just run this code, well, let's see what happens. So now we get that fast render, and there we see that the message has gone away. So if we go back and choose someone else, we get the fast render. And then once the data loads, the message goes away and we can go ahead and add a product. But there's kind of a problem here, right? I mean, if we click on one of these users, even though we get a fast initial render, we have this message, and then all of a sudden, once that slow query finishes, this button just pops in. So we're actually seeing a bug in our template. And I think it'll make more sense if we just open that template. The component is actually this select product form. And here we can see that if the user's employer subscriptions length is 0, it's going to render this message that says the company has no active subscriptions. And if we refresh and scroll down, we see it says Acme has no active subscriptions. And then that button pops in. So the problem with this template is that it was coded under the assumption that all the employer's subscriptions were already loaded. And we can see here there's basically two states that it accounts for. One is that the employer has 0 subscriptions, and the other is that it has some subscriptions, in which case it can render this add product button. The problem is by moving the data loading into after model and allowing the app to render, we've introduced a new state to our application. This template can now render when an employer's subscriptions haven't even been loaded yet. That's a third state that we just didn't account for when we first coded this template. So what we need to do is fix this. We need to make the select product form more robust so that it can render accurately even if the employer's subscriptions have never been loaded. Now, we've moved this data loading into after model, and sometimes this is a good approach. But I'm actually going to take another one. I'm going to delete this from the route, come over here to our component, and I'm just going to paste this in here, and I'm going to make this a task on the component. And let's call it fetch subscriptions. And we want to yield this request. And we're no longer getting user from the params, but this component is already accepting user in as an argument. So we can just use this.get user.id. And now we have an Ember concurrency task on this component that will fetch the data it needs. So let's go ahead and define didInsertElement and then get this task and perform it. So let's save this and check it out. So we have that fast render, and then we see that button change. So the data is being loaded. We can see all the products here, but we still have that bad UX of the flashing content. But now that we have this task right on our component, we can use it in our template and account for that new state. We can say if fetch subscriptions is running, then we're actually loading the subscriptions. Otherwise, if we have 0 subscriptions, we'll render the message. Otherwise, we'll show the add product button. So let's save this and give it a shot. So now we load and we see this loading subscriptions message. And then once that task finishes, we can go ahead and click add product. And if we go back out to this members list, and we'll just choose a company that doesn't have any subscriptions. So company 1 doesn't have any subscriptions. If we visit a user, we see it loads the subscriptions, but then when it's done, it shows us the message. So now this component accounts for all 3 states that it can be in. Now we can make this a little nicer. Most companies in this app have subscriptions, and so most of the time this button will exist in the UI. So the fact that every time we render a page, it shows this loading subscriptions message and then it changes, it's kind of annoying, and especially on users that have products. So if we come here and find LeBron James, he has all of these products here, but we still see that message and the button shows up. And that's annoying because people could come visit a user and want to look at their products or their details and do all sorts of stuff. And the fact that, again, this part of the UI is just flashing and it draws attention to itself is not ideal. So what I ended up doing was actually rendering this button, but in a disabled state. So let's find the button, and here's the add product button. And what I'm going to do is just, instead of rendering this message, we'll just render this button, but we won't have a click handler on it. We'll keep it small, but we'll also make it disabled. And now the button should render, and you'll see it's actually faded out, and then it fades in once the products are loaded. So in the meantime, you can't click on it, but once it's ready to go, you can. And I think that's just a nice subtle detail that improves the UI of this page, because for the most part, if you're not clicking that button, you won't even notice that it's not ready to go. Now we could even get fancier here, and let's say if you hover over that button while it's disabled, you show a tooltip that says loading subscriptions. You could also do something like not even fetch the subscriptions until the user hovers or clicks on the button. But you get the basic idea. We've moved the data fetching into this component, and now we can easily render this third state that's occurring when the subscriptions are being fetched for the first time. So now our app is much more speedy, and folks can get to their information much faster, but everything works just like before. We can still add a product, save it, visit the subscription, and so on. So all of this is working great. So to recap, these big queries that end up in our model hooks and block our app from rendering can sometimes make our pages feel really slow. To fix this, we looked at two different techniques. One was to move the slower part of the query to the after model hook and make sure that we didn't return it. That way the query gets run, but our app was allowed to render with whatever data came back from the model hook. The second way was to co-locate the query inside of the component that's displaying the data. Now we use an Ember concurrency task here, which let us easily use the derived state from that task to update our template. Now, deferring data loading like this does have some trade-offs. As we saw, the main one is that it introduced a new state into our application. And as we all know, state is what makes our jobs hard. But I think co-locating the data request with our select product form was a definite win. It makes the component more robust, and now we can reuse this component anywhere in our application. It knows how to fetch its own data, and it knows how to render itself in any state. So, in your own apps, if you come across some really slow routes, be sure to look out for requests that load secondary or non-essential data and block your entire app from rendering. You can often get an easy performance win without compromising the UI by deferring those requests until after the initial render.